come once again to discuss things.
Yes.
Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentleman History Month, the month in which we discuss the contributions the geeky gentlemen have made to history, but that have been ignored by biased educational system, except, not at all. I am Sid Partu. Joining me today is the one and only, the Comics Kid 2099 himself.
Hello.
Hello. So, as we do in History Month, we're here to review a period piece film. It kind of just has to come up. Due to circumstances of history-making events happening with Geeky Gentlemen this year, this pretty much going to be our only film review. So, sorry about that, folks. But it's a interesting film to talk about. Ruben, what are we talking about tonight?
We are talking about the, I believe, 2007 film There Will Be Blood, starring Daniel Day-Lewis.
Indeed we are. Now let me ask you, have you ever seen this film before?
No. In fact, I didn't really know what it was about before I started watching it.
Okay, that's really interesting then. I watched this movie a couple times. It is one of those movies you have to prepare yourself to get into. I believe I warned you about that.
Yeah.
I've watched this movie a couple times, and I think it is insanely quotable, but also just a really fucking good and interesting film that definitely has some stuff to say about, stances on social issues and political views. But it does it just entirely through demonstration of a character. It is kind of my go-to example of show don't tell when it comes to portraying quote-unquote art or quote-unquote politics or social commentary in art. So it's really no surprise that I really, really like this movie. What'd you think of it?
This is a movie I would not have watched without it being chosen. I took a film class my last full semester in college, and we had a bunch of movies like that where I never would have watched them just because, but being forced to watch them, several of them I actually really enjoyed. This is one I think I could enjoy it again under certain contexts or certain conditions, but it was a movie. It's very difficult to really. It's difficult for me to approach this movie because a lot of the characters are just kind of scumbags, and so it's kind of hard for me to enjoy it on that level. And I'm not saying every movie has to have nice good guy characters. There's plenty of stories I can think of where the protagonist or whatever is just a jerk. But this movie, it was especially hard, I felt because I felt like almost every character was that way. And it kind of reminded me of Whiplash, which was another example where it seemed like everyone loved Whiplash and I didn't. And I had the same thing with Whiplash.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying that there's not really a good person in this movie. Maybe HW, but at the same time, he just gets to be a boy the whole movie, and he doesn't seem to really learn anything about his father by the end of it.
And it's interesting, I guess we're just jumping right to the end real quick, but, at the end he says, I'm glad that I don't have any of you in me. And I'm thinking, mate, technically, no, you're not blood related, but I feel like he's probably rubbed off on you, because he says he wants to go and start his own oil business. And I'm thinking, you've got a little bit more of him in you than you think. And I think that's a little interesting. And the kid may not be as not malevolent, as morally gray as his adopted father, but I think there's more of his adopted father in him than what he lets on.
Oh, I mean, definitely. That's a line that's more just Daniel Plainview just kind of trying to put his son down and remove himself, because just the second that kid becomes deaf, um, Daniel has the hardest time dealing with it because it's not because he's losing a son or losing a connection with his son. It's because now he's less. Now he's special. Now he's now he's not a strapping young lad. Now he is disabled, and so it doesn't have the same kind of messaging that he wants him to have and all this stuff. So he's useless in his father's eyes, but Daniel also can't just come out and say that and act that way in public because that will reflect really poorly on him. And so it's just really, really messed up in that regard. Everyone in this movie is a scumbag to one degree or another. There's no fully redeemable characters except for maybe the girl that HW ends up marrying.
And again, she's just a little girl throughout most of it and doesn't have much agency in the story, kind of like HW too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, you say you didn't like the movie in like a typical sense, but did you, or enjoy the movie, but did you think it was well done? Did you think it was a good movie?
Absolutely. It's one of those that I have a very narrow realm of media that I enjoy. Usually I have to have some kind of like dumb genre stuff, like, robots or elves or whatever. And this is not any of that, but this is a very well-made movie. I was reading up on it after I watched it, and several people were saying this was the best movie of the 21st century so far. And I haven't watched every movie of the 21st century, but, it's very well made. Like, kind of reminds me, have you ever seen The Treasure of the Sierra Madre?
No.
It's got Humphrey Bogart, and the kind of overall theme reminds me a little bit of Treasure of the Sierra Madre. It's not the same plot really, but a lot of the thematic stuff seems very similar to that.
Okay, that's interesting. I really, really like this movie. I remember watching it in high school. It came out in 2007. It was nominated for Best Picture. It did not win. Trying to remember what won. Oh, it was No Country for Old Men, if I'm remembering correctly. This was the year No Country for Old Men came out as well, and that movie does not compare to this one on any level whatsoever, especially because the ending sucks. Whereas
I haven't seen it, but apparently they were filming really close together, and when they did in this movie, when they did the explosion at the oil drilling site, apparently the smoke from that actually halted filming on No Country for Old Men for a little bit.
That's hilarious. I did not know that. Oh, that's really funny. No, but like just, the ending to this movie is literally perfect. I love the like conclusion to the cat and mouse game that Daniel and Eli had been playing throughout the whole fucking movie. I don't know, it's just a really, really interesting thing, and I thought it'd be interesting to talk about for History Month, not only because it's a period piece, but also because, like, there's a lot of commentary on the character of the man that Daniel Plainview is, and how he kind of represents a last breath, or a last gasp of a dying age of man.
Yeah.
Set in the era that this is, because like the film starts in 1898, and Daniel Plainview is clearly like, Daniel Day-Lewis is obviously very old, getting very old at that point, but Daniel in the beginning of the film is meant to be probably like mid-30s.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end of the movie, it's like 1927, and he's like, 50s, 60s, something like that. And so it's just really interesting to see how this kind of old world view starts butting up against new world stuff, new world bullshit, and just does not fit. He just does not work in quote unquote the modern age at all. The world that is being built up around him is just not suited for his type of a person anymore, and I find that really, really interesting.
Yeah, I like that idea just about all the time, and I can't think of a lot of great examples of that. I know there was a Western movie that Tom Selleck did where he was a cowboy in an era where cowboys are starting to fade out and like automobiles are starting to become a thing, and like very automobiles, and that kind of thing is always interesting to me. Never ever has a happy ending for that character, but it's always fascinating to see that kind of arc play out in any transitionary period.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. So I don't know, I just really like that side of the story, and I think it's kind of hanging in the background of everything that happens throughout the entire movie. And that's really interesting. It's pretty obvious this is a pretty harsh critique of capitalism, I'd like to say. I don't think that theme is hidden all too well. Even in high school, I got that, and I was like, oh, well, that's all well and good, but really, it's just the only system that works, and so I was just kind of buying into the bullshit back then. And so, I don't know, I really like that stuff, too. To get more into that side of things, I really like the way that this kind of deconstructs and symbolizes it. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Do you think maybe it would have been better if we had like a character who is pursuing capitalism and trying to get wealthy, but isn't as morally bankrupt as Daniel Plainview, or do you think it works better that everyone in a movie who's trying to get rich is very deeply flawed?
I mean, I think that's kind of the point, is in order to get, like, I'm not going to, the communist that I am, I'm not going to say that every rich person is automatically a bad person for being rich.
Right.
I think in order to get to the amount of wealth that a character like Daniel Plainview has, relative to his time, you have to just be an awful person. I think that's kind of the argument the movie's trying to make, but at the same time, like, the qualities that make Daniel Plainview a very successful capitalist are also the qualities that make him just so out of touch with the world he's starting to live in, and just make him so uncomfortable and unsettlingly creepy in scenes. And it's just so off. Like, this guy, like, okay, you got like the Lex Luthor style capitalist, right? Like the very charismatic, the just charming as fuck guy. Like, you can almost, like, or to give a real world example, Elon Musk is a bit of a prick, but there's certainly a charm to him, and people really like him. So you got like that guy who you can understand can charm his way into $1 billion. And then you've just got like, oh, I don't know, someone who's orange, maybe. You just got like someone who is almost entirely based on luck and circumstances and really didn't, quote unquote, do anything for their money. So like, you've got these opposing views of capitalism and the wealthy. Daniel Plainview, it is totally fair to say, is a self-made man. I'll give him that. The movie opens with the dude digging in a fucking mine and breaking his leg, which he has to deal with for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
I'll give him that. But like, just scenes where he's trying to charm people are so are so fucky. They're just, oh, it's so weird. It's like, I am an oil man. Now let me tell you, you'll have prospectors, but they're just that, prospect. Like, just, he's got these rehearsed speeches that he keeps giving to people. This is my son, HW. We run a family business. And it's just, every time he tries to charm someone, it never works. Because he doesn't have any charm. He doesn't have any charisma. The best relationship he has in the whole fucking movie is when he meets a oil competitor on a train and tells him immediately to get the fuck out of town. He already marked this territory. Go east. Maybe you'll luck into something there. It's like, just shit. He's just a really creepy and off-putting individual.
Yeah. I think that him as trying to be a family man, I think that's a very interesting thing to discuss, because I'm on the fence about, like, you know, he adopts the kid, and at first you're thinking, like, well, he feels guilty because he is responsible for the kid's actual father dying, and so he raises the little boy. But then it's like, oh no, he's just using the kid for his business aspects. So, like, it's almost like he doesn't care about the kid. He just wants the kid there to present himself as a family man. But then there are times where I see him and it's like, it almost looks like he is trying to be a good father, like trying to be, not necessarily succeeding. And so, I don't know, like, it's really fascinating. He's a multifaceted character. Like I said, that there's not any characters in this movie who are good people, but they're all flawed. They're not, I don't think any of them are necessarily 100% bad people either. And I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, the relationship with HW is probably the most complex thing on the screen, because Daniel certainly tells us that he was only using HW the whole time. And while that is certainly true, he was certainly using HW for imagery, and the second HW lost his hearing and became disabled, he doesn't work on the same level of charming imagery. So he has to abandon that side of it. But at the same time, there are moments that don't have a public face in which he is clearly has some level of care for HW. Like the moment, what was it? I just had it and I lost it. The moment when he's like sent him away to a school to learn sign language and stuff. He pulls his assistant to the side and is like, how big's his room? Like, that's what he wants to know. Like, he wants to know how well he's being taken care of there. So there's definitely something, but I'm not sure how much of that is genuine care for this child that he's raised, and how much of it is concern upon how his child being raised, or the conditions under which his child's being treated, reflect on himself.
Yeah.
I don't know. Where do you think? Where do you think that line is?
I would say, unfortunately, I would have to say it's probably the latter. I think it's more concerned with how it makes him look. And there's a couple of other instances where, for a hot second, I'm thinking, oh, he's trying to be an actual father. And then I'm like, oh, wait, no, he's not. Like, there's a part, it's after his son has come back from school, and he's like, they're at the dining room, and he's putting like the napkin on his face, trying to cheer his son up. And I'm thinking, like, he's, you know, that's good. Like, he's trying to get his son to not be as angry at him. But then I'm thinking, oh, wait, he's putting on a show for these guys who are sitting on the other side of the room. And so he wouldn't be acting that way if him and his son were just in the room by themselves. And then there was another scene where it's right after his son, the explosion, and he's hugging his son. And at first I'm thinking, okay, he's trying to comfort his son. But then, like, his son is moaning, obviously, because, like, he's just been deafened. And, like, I guess he's making noise to try and see if he, like, trying to figure out, like, can I hear myself, you know, like, testing the limits of his deafness, I guess. And then the dad, or Daniel Plainview, was saying, like, hey, stop that. Stop doing that. And it's just like, wow, like, what a dick move.
Yeah, I mean, like, the well starts to spring, and there's obviously a lot of danger in that moment, and I'll give him credit. The first thing he does is go to HW.
Mm-hmm.
He just leaves him after that.
Yeah.
And like I don't know, it's a really hard one, to be fair, because while he is a parent, he's also technically responsible for everyone else there, and so it would be a bit irresponsible, or it would certainly be irresponsible, rather, for him to just leave that chaotic scene the way it was, because, I mean, all it did was get worse.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, in all that chaos, you see him celebrating, because he knows he's just made himself a billionaire. You know?
Yeah.
Like, he is just immediately happy, even though he's left his son. And that's just, it's really, really unsettling. Like, I love that shot of him in the dark with the oh, what do they call it? They use the word, like, a couple times. The oil well, the dicket,
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I watched it on
the derrick.
Yeah.
Yeah, they use the word the derrick. Like he's watching the derrick just burn down, and it's just still spewing oil and just on fire the whole time. You know, you see his face just covered and drenched in oil and sweat, and it's kind of like, it's so well shot with the background of the night sky, and he just looks like a demon kind of emerging out of the darkness. It's so creepy.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that. I just wanted to talk about how fucking cool that shot is, I guess.
Oh, it was. It kind of... I just recently rewatched, or watched for the first time, rather, the first Halloween movie. It kind of reminds me of that shot where there's a shot where Michael Myers is just slowly emerging out of like a closet. Kind of sort of reminded me of that a little bit.
Yeah, fair enough. It's just, I don't know, it's really interesting how what kind of position they put him in. I remember where I was going with that now. He's so damn opportunistic and focused on what's going to help him, and it's really creepy to see someone who's just that far detached from everyone else. I feel like it's definitely not a silent movie, but there are very long periods of silence in this film.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the filmmaking, the shots, the way that it's shot is helping to tell his, like, helping to move the narrative and display his character?
Yeah. You know, you and I talked, well, you and Manos talked about silent movies when we talked about Nosferatu, and you were saying, like, you know, it's really difficult to watch silent movies for you. But in this case, I liked the use of the long stretches of silence, especially like at the beginning. I think it's like 15 minutes in before we get any dialogue at all. But I think that in that 15 minutes, it does a very good job of telling us what's going on without the need to put, I mean, you get like subtitles on the screen, like what the year is and stuff like that, but we don't have to have characters talking just to let us know what's going on. And I think that it does a good job of letting us know, you know what I'm saying? Like it tells the story without needing to use all the tools at their disposal. And I think that's good filmmaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to as well. There's just a lot of really interesting shots of Daniel Day-Lewis kind of draped in shadow and just looking insanely creepy. Like when he's at a bar, or a brothel is probably more apt, with the guy pretending to be his brother, and he's started to suspect him, and he's just staring daggers at the man.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much. You already know what's going to happen with that scene. you already know where that's leading with this guy. But then there are other scenes where it's just shot so normal, and yet the scene turns on a fucking dime. Like when they sit down with I forget what they call the company, like American Standard or whatever, the other big oil corporation. When they sit down and the other big corporation's trying to buy him out of Little Boston, and the guy says, like, and he's like, what would I do with $1 million? What am I gonna do? And the guy's like, you go and you could take care of your son. And Daniel Day-Lewis just, like, the camera doesn't do anything. It's all on Daniel Day-Lewis's performance. It's just like, I'm going to come into your house and I'm going to slit your throat. And it's just like, holy shit. If you guys can't tell, I really like doing Daniel Day-Lewis's voice from this movie.
Apparently, he was inspired by the actor John Huston, who I don't think I've seen a lot with him. I think he did the voice of, I believe, Gandalf from one of the animated Lord of the Rings movies, but he's the father of Angelica Houston, who's... But yeah, that apparently a lot of his mannerisms and his vocal cadences were inspired by John Huston.
Daniel Day-Lewis is one of those actors who just loses himself in a role way too completely. I was going to choose either this or Gangs of New York, and I went with this just because, I don't know, capitalism seems really useful to talk about nowadays. And I just... God, this movie, but like in Gangs of New York, Daniel Day-Lewis wore actual clothing from that era. Instead of like letting the costume designers make him something, he wore actual clothing, and it gave him tuberculosis.
Oh.
And he had to stop wearing it, or he was going to die.
Yeah. Wow.
It's kind of crazy, this shit he gets into.
I hate to say it, I haven't seen a whole lot with him. I've seen part of The Last of the Mohicans. I was in high school. It was actually before this came out, and it was one of those times where it was the end of the semester and all of the teachers just wanted to grade papers and didn't want to deal with the kids, so most of the teachers would just put a movie on, and I was
American
not really
public education at its finest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I wasn't paying a heck of a lot of attention. I think I was like playing cards or just chatting with one of my friends. But the movie, The Last of the Mohicans, was on. And I think that's the only other thing that I've seen with him. And I wasn't even paying that much attention to it. So seeing this movie, like I said, I don't watch movies like this on purpose very often. But like the performance here is phenomenal. And it really makes me want to look up more stuff with him.
Oh yeah, no, Daniel Day-Lewis is a powerhouse of acting. He did Lincoln with Spielberg. That's one of his more recent ones. Gangs of New York, he is absolutely phenomenal. One of the best roles anyone's ever played in history, Bill the Butcher by Daniel Day-Lewis. Absolutely fantastic. And he's been in, of course, a bunch of other films, but he's very selective in what he'll do because he just throws himself into a role so much. And, like, you could tell he's kind of loving this because so much of the movie is just all about how he's performing this character. And, like, it's so many of the little things. Like, the limp gets so much worse throughout his life. And that's really interesting. The strength of the man is really interesting to see the way he portrays it. Like, he just kicks the shit out of Eli with some slaps. He doesn't punch Eli, he slaps the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Like, he actually goes and he picks up the little kid. There's just a lot going on there that's really, really fascinating. He plays just a horrific drunk. There's a lot going on with just the subtleties of the performance there. I love the way he slurs his words when he gets spotted in public with his son. He's like, "You look like a fool."
I did want to say I forgot that I have seen The Crucible with Winona Ryder. He was in that. I didn't recognize him and didn't realize he was in that, but I had seen that one. But
He's
yeah,
a fucking chameleon.
yeah.
He kind of disappears into these roles.
And that was also in '97, so that was 10 years before. And then There Will Be Blood. Wow, I'm trying to combine. And then There Were None. Yeah, he's really good in this. And so I think, and you're right, like he brings a lot of small subtleties to the role that you might not notice the first time or even the first 5 times, but eventually if you keep watching, you're going to be like, oh, hey, look, yeah, you're right. The limp gets worse. And that's something that I wouldn't have thought of if they had come to me to play this role, and that's why they didn't get me. Well, that and like I'm not a man in my 60s who could do this.
Just fucking like Hollywood casting director randomly sees some of your videos, is like, he's perfect.
Yeah. No, he's really good, like with the small stuff that that I think a lot of actors would struggle with.
Yeah. So I really like his performance, and then it's crazy though, because there's so much going on that's just on Daniel Day-Lewis as an actor, and then that just, it makes some of the way that the film highlights the character so much more impressive to me, because kind of by all rights, the film shouldn't have to. This could almost be a stage play, given how much of it takes place in just one spot. You might have to spray your audience with oil at some point.
Have you ever watched the Addams Family movie?
Yeah.
I'm just imagining that, where like they're spraying the audience with the blood. Yeah, totally. No, but like, there's so much of it just takes place in one spot, and it's so focused on just Daniel Day-Lewis's performance. But then they do so much with it visually to really just display how isolated this guy is from kind of everyone. Like, he's so rarely on screen with more than 1 or 2 people at a time. He takes everything so personally. He gets these fantastic monologues. It's like, I have an anger in me. Just shit like that. Oh, it's so good. It just, you wouldn't expect it to be to have as much range as it does in the way that it portrays him on the screen, and I think it's really, really smart. Everything about it, like, just looks so different. When he's on screen with everyone, it helps that Daniel Day-Lewis is tall as fuck, but he's taller than everyone. He's just creepy and weird on the screen, and they do a lot to sell that stuff. Do you want to talk about his air quotes brother and their relationship they have?
Yeah, sure.
So that's another instance where if Daniel Plainview wasn't already kind of a despicable person in the first half of the movie, I feel like this betrayal from this guy he thought was family would be a good reason / excuse why he's so terrible to everyone. Like, you see this guy, you think he's your brother, and you bring him into your house, you welcome him with open arms, and it turns out he's not your brother. He just took advantage of your actual brother being dead, and he just wants your money. And wow, what a betrayal. Like, that's almost like a supervillain origin story right there, where it's just like, screw everybody. Like, this is what I get whenever I try to be nice to someone and bring them in, and they're just trying to take advantage of me. It's one of those moments where I'm on Daniel Plainview's side. I thought that was,
he murders a man.
Right. I'm just like, yeah, you know what? You go, man. But yeah, I guess I should say I'm the closest to being on his side. But I don't know. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, the subplot with his brother showing up because it's a very pivotal moment in the movie that kind of leads into the third act. Um and it just, I don't know, it's a really interesting thing because his brother's there for the heights of the celebration. And there's just this one little moment where he gets something slightly wrong, and every suspicion that Daniel's had throughout their relationship so far comes to a head in an instant. And that's really scary because as soon as he turns on him, he's done.
Yeah.
Like, there's absolutely no reason for him to kill this guy. Absolutely none. The whole time he's like, he's got the guy at gunpoint, and the dude knows he's cooked, and he's just like, Daniel, you don't have to do this. I can walk away. I can just leave. You'll never hear from me again. Is really, really scary. And at the same time, it kind of goes back to that whole man from a dying age thing. Because if you'd seen something like that in a movie that was like a Western, like think about the setting of that scene, right? It's two guys in the woods camping out on the frontier, basically, right?
Yeah.
And yet, like, if you'd seen that kind of scene in a Western, like the big moment, and the quote-unquote hero had shot the guy and buried him because of how awful the betrayal was, you probably wouldn't think twice about it. Like, yeah, murder's bad and all, but just in the context of a different time in the mid-1800s or something, you probably wouldn't think that much of something like that. The fact that it's in the early 1900s and it changes it, it colors it in such a different way, and it makes it feel so much wronger that he murdered this guy. But it like, from Daniel's perspective, yeah, that's just what people did back then. Someone betrays you, you just kill them. I find that really, really fascinating.
Yeah, and that's, like you said, that's more of that like transition period where like he's a man of a certain era, and this era is no longer his home. Like, he was born in the wrong time, so to speak.
Yeah, he should have been born like he's an oil man, but he really should have been born like 20 to 30 years earlier, because he just doesn't fit in this time period anymore. It's like he would have been fine just in the Wild West shooting people who cheated at cards or something, right? That's the kind of the guy he wants to, or that's the guy he was raised to be almost, because like Eli comes and asks for his $5,000, and yet he's like not come to quote unquote heal his son, and that just pisses him off, and he just wants to beat the shit out of him in the dirt. And there it's okay because everyone's working for him. And that's just, it's weird, it's unsettling, it's different. He's trying to present himself as a modern man, an oil man, and yet he doesn't really fit the era that he's in, and that doesn't become more apparent anywhere else until he starts meeting with other oilmen. And he's just so different. I find that stuff really, really interesting, how he is a character just trapped in his time.
Yeah, and like I said, I love that kind of thing just in general.
Let's go on and talk about some of the other characters in this. Probably the most notable one, of course, is Eli.
Yeah. Why don't you take us in a direction with Eli?
Okay. So, with this movie being a critique on capitalism and how, like, the kinds of people that succeed under a capitalist system, I think it's really interesting to have outright religious characters be no better than the so-called villain of the story. you know, or
Mhm.
so-called hero of the story.
Mhm.
And I think Eli is a really interesting peg in that, because he is a character who is a foil for Daniel in a number of ways. Um, they're both incredibly prideful. They're both pretty laser focused in what they want. They're both willing to step on people to get what they want. They're both very manipulative.
Yeah.
They have just a presence in a room, which is really interesting. I don't know. What do you think of Eli as a foil for Daniel?
Well, what I think is interesting about him, a lot of times when I think of a foil, and I could be like thinking of it incorrectly, but like I think of like characters who are just completely opposite. Like Lex Luthor is in, you know, like you said, he's charming, but it's all fake. He doesn't like people, whereas Superman is charming, but he is genuine. And then like Luthor, he will step on everyone. Superman will help people up. You know, it's a diametrically opposed on every level. With these two, I feel like they are very different, but they're also very similar, like you said. Like there's that scene in the church where we first see Eli casting out the demons, and you're just like how do these people not see that he's just hamming it up and that he's clearly just faking it? And he's got them eating out of his hand, and it's something that it's a charm, air quotes charm, that like from where I was sitting, I'm like, well, he's obviously just cartoonishly like manipulating them, but they buy it, and that's a charm that Daniel probably wishes he had. But at the same time, Daniel ends up just about owning the town, and Eli comes to him at the end saying like, I need help. And so like, while Eli seems to have a certain power that Daniel doesn't have, Daniel is still more successful than Eli in the end.
Yeah, and that's like, and Daniel kind of needs to rub it in, and that doesn't get anywhere near enough for him, you know? Like that scene early on or well, I guess it's kind of more toward the middle of the movie. Like, you could be a millionaire sitting at this table, and then what? Yeah, like, why? Then what? What will I do with $1 million? Because Daniel isn't suited for the age which is coming, so he just sits around his mansion shooting stuff. He doesn't, and drinking. He doesn't have any ability to be civil-minded or anything. And so just the way that he contrasts with Eli there is he wants to have kind of the smug villain victory of just demoralizing his foe. And that's not enough for him. Like, immediately that is not enough. And he just has to lash out with physical violence, because that's all he really knows how to do. Like, he conceptually knows how to deal with the other stuff, the stuff that's supposed to satisfy him as a you know, rich and evil capitalist. He knows how to do that stuff, but it doesn't work for him. He doesn't get the thrill out of it like that he gets from killing a man or beating a man to death, kind of thing. And that's really, really interesting. Whereas Eli, like, he does spout all these religious platitudes and stuff, and he knows the things that he's supposed to do as a religious leader to prove his holiness or whatever, but it's all about him. There's that underlying selfishness, to the point where, like, he keeps bringing up that Daniel should have let him bless the well so that accidents and awful things wouldn't have happened. And that's not because he honestly, or the impression I get at least, is not because he honestly thinks that blessing the well would have saved anyone. It's that he can tell himself that it would. You know, it's that he he can continue the fiction that he would have had the power to save everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets to rub that in on Daniel. So, like, every little failure, or big failure indeed, that Daniel has is kind of magnified by this snot-nosed kid who thinks he's hot shit and literally the voice of God, saying, I could have stopped this if only you'd listen to me.
This is kind of just a side note, but that last scene, when I feel like it's supposed to be really dramatic, and it is, but also I found, like, when he's throwing bowling balls at him and, like, hitting him with the bowling pins, I was also kind of laughing at that scene. Like, it just, the way Eli is just, like, running like a child, and, like, screaming, don't do it. Like, I feel like
We're brothers, Daniel.
Yeah. It's funny to me, but also it's a really powerful scene too. Like, some really good acting. And then
no, dude, like, you don't even understand. I drink your milkshake. I drink it up is one of the most quotable fucking lines from any goddamn movie I've ever seen. There's really funny edits. I don't know if they're still on YouTube, but you should be able to find them. Of Daniel Day-Lewis from that scene, cut to the song Milkshake. My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard. Damn right, it's better than yours. Yeah, that song. And it's so fucking funny. And I don't know, it's just like, you're right, that scene is very dramatic and it's very intense, but it's also kind of undeniably got an air of silliness to it. And I don't know what it is, and I don't know, like, it feels intentional. I don't feel like the director's like, oh yes, this drama is so intense. I feel like they know it's kind of silly, and I'm not entirely sure what the messaging is there.
I don't know either, because definitely by the time he kills Eli, it's definitely not funny anymore. But, like, when he's just throwing the bowling pins at him, I feel like maybe it's just because, like,
I am the third revelation.
It's just like it's so, like, it's bowling pins, like, it's part of a frivolous game, and he's just like, you don't ever think of, like, oh, like, he's just throwing these little tiny, like, 1 foot tall bowling pins, and I don't know, it doesn't seem like the setting of, like, a dramatic death scene, or dramatic murder scene rather. So maybe it's hard for me to explain, but it's one of those things.
Okay, should we try to get super literal in analyzing this then?
Yeah, sure. I may not be able to do it, but we can try.
All right. So Daniel represents the capitalist. And Eli represents the church. And then
which in this case, and I say this, I know you're an atheist, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not. I'm a Christian, but in this case, I'm seeing that, and I will even go so far as to say that there are churches, there are aspects of churches that are very bad and are, like, will manipulate the members of their church, and that's what Eli is doing here. And he's not just representing the church, but also, like, the greed of people in power in clergy. Like,
I think that's fair.
And, that you see that all the time, like, I mean, there are entire stories where that is, like, the crux of the theme. So definitely, yeah.
All right. And so we have the capitalist trying to murder this corrupted church official with bowling pins. And yeah, the fact that he's trying to murder him with parts of a silly game does feel pretty damn important. Right? Like, you could have had, like, he's literally shooting guns in his house. You could have killed him with the gun. The setting of the bowling alley is probably important. Huh. So let's spitball here. What does the bowling alley represent?
I don't know, like a return to youth, maybe, or return to innocence?
Nah, I don't think so. I think the, like, game, I think, is really important. I think it's the fact that, like, Daniel and, well, I mean, because Daniel and Eli have been playing a bit of a game of one-upsmanship with each other back and forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you got, like, Paul, who pays, or who gives the information to Daniel in exchange for money, and Daniel shows up there and he tries to undercut the Sundays and buy the ranch out from under them at way cheaper than they actually deserve. And Eli calls him up on that, so then he has to go for hire, and he has to promise all these things like a church and all this stuff. And then Daniel kind of gets him back by not letting him give the sermon, and Eli kind of gets him back for that by continuously undercutting him and suggesting that it's his fault because he didn't get to bless the well. And then Daniel kicks the shit out of him in the mud, and then Eli kind of feels like he's lost at that point, and he disappears from the movie for a good long while after that.
Mm-hmm.
So there is definitely a game being played between the two of them, and I guess the bowling alley then could symbolize the end of their game.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and you know, yeah, I think so. I didn't really think of it that way, but it could just be it's a game, like bowling is a game between. I mean, it can be between multiple people, but it could also be just one-on-one. And this is it ending, and you know, the whole movie has been them trying to, like you said, trying to one-up each other. So I really wasn't thinking of that, but that is it's a simple, but it's a good read on that. Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to think about, like, so if they're trying to one-up each other left and right in the church, and if Eli's supposed to represent the church and Daniel's supposed to represent the capitalist, is it fair to say that the assessment there in the last scene then is the church becoming corrupted through the influence of capitalism and ultimately destroying itself, or capitalism ultimately murdering the church through that kind of poisonous influence?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because, like, it's so, like, I'm an atheist, of course, but I'm not that kind of atheist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, like, oh, all religion is bad. No, fuck that noise. But, like, there's the idea of charity, goodwill kind of thing wrapped up in Christianity in particular. Saw a great quote from Existential Comics on Twitter today. It's like, I really like that question, what would Jesus do? Because the answer is just give all your earthly possessions away, and yet no one wants to do that. And it's an oversimplification, but it's still pretty funny. So, like, there's definitely the undercurrent there of Eli is a very greedy, very self-centered person who's just using the church for his own means, but it's having a negative effect on the church regardless of him not being the church solely himself,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that definitely has implications. I don't know if my hot take there is necessarily the read I have on the movie. That's just me really trying to literalize the hell out of that scene.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and it's entirely possible that it was just shot in a bowling alley because, hey, look, we have this cool 20th century bowling alley.
yeah. Well, that could be it. And I took classes in college like about like reading into like critical analysis and how to do it, and we were told like it doesn't matter what the author says, and so like Paul is it Paul Thomas Anderson or the director?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Oh yeah, Paul Thomas Anderson. Like he could come out right now and say the bowling alley doesn't mean jack. It's just a cool scene. It's more visceral this way, and it's more cathartic or whatever to see him do it this way than to just shoot him. That he could say that, and it wouldn't matter because you've still been able to read a valid interpretation of why there's a film, why it's set in the bowling alley. Like you said, they're playing a game of wits throughout the entire movie, and it is a game, and then it all culminates on this game, on this playing field where you play a game. So like, even if that wasn't intentional, the fact is it's still there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to think about. I've said pretty early on that I think this movie is a really harsh take on capitalism, and we've talked about that a bit, but not as nearly as much as I thought we might. And so I figure it'd probably be better than to kind of transition and talk about those themes in particular, because this movie is not wholly, but is partially inspired by the book Oil, which was written by the same guy who wrote The Jungle.
Oh yeah, Upton Sinclair.
Yeah. So this is partially inspired by that, and he, of course, massive communist. Funny story about The Jungle. It's all about the slaughterhouse industry, and it uses that as a metaphor for the capitalist system. So huge communist guy here. Writes the book The Jungle. People read it and don't get the metaphor and just think it's like this journalistic takedown of the slaughterhouse industry.
Yeah.
Including the president at the time. I want to say Coolidge. I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me on that part. Including the president at the time reads that.
Might have been Roosevelt. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
It might have been Theodore Roosevelt. I'm looking it up.
Okay. Yeah, anyway, he reads that, invites Coolidge to the White House and says, "We're really going to start to take some action on the things you talked about here in your book." And the guy's like, "Oh shit, did I just inspire socialism in the United States?" And no, he didn't. I always find that really funny.
It was Theodore Roosevelt.
Okay.
But yeah, I spent a few years thinking that it was just a journalistic takedown. And to be fair, I've never read it. I've never even seen a copy of it. But I remember in high school, they would talk about Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, like, you know, people found out how the sausage was made. And I just want to say, like, thank goodness that they did take action, because I really like sausage, and I would probably throw up right now if I thought for one hot second that they made sausage the way they did before he wrote that book, where it's just like, yeah, let's just throw some live rats in there. It'll be fine. But like, I haven't read it. And so a friend of mine, like it was probably a couple of years after I graduated high school, he was saying like, yeah, there's an actual narrative to that story. It's not just like a expose. And I was like, what? Like, I had no idea. So I found that, and I also didn't know until I was reading about this movie that Upton Sinclair had wrote other things other than The Jungle.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually how writers work. Not everyone's a Harper Lee. Or no, Lee Harper, sorry. Anyway, yeah, so Oil is, I haven't read Oil either, but like, so the strong critique of capitalist system is here, and yeah, it's not just, I feel it's fair to say, it's not just in a critique of Daniel Plainview as a character. It's like, he's kind of just emblematic of the system, and he's kind of bad at the whole capitalist promise thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he comes to the town, he's like, "Oh, we'll build a school, and I like the..." Sorry, I'm not doing my Daniel Day-Lewis voice, and you deserve better from me. "We'll build a school here, because education is important, and our children deserve the best. And, of course, a church, a road. The new road will lead straight to the church first." Just like, he comes into town, he's promising the moon and the stars, and that, like, just let me fuck up your town, and I swear I will make it so good for it. "We'll drill wells, that means irrigation, that means crops, that means bread. Bread will no longer be a luxury." Just everything about that is so... it's so wrapped up into everything we still hear today. Like, how often do you hear this stuff like, "Oh, well, yeah, things will be shit in this regard, but look at all the jobs it will create, and it'll make things so much better." Like the fucking oil pipeline shit that we were hearing about for so goddamn long. And of course, it's still a fucking oil pipeline. God, how did I not think of that?
Yeah.
The pipeline's going to create millions of jobs. It's a pipeline. Its whole point is to make transporting oil cost less. It's not going to create millions of jobs.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And like, I think, like we were talking about his charm, like that, you kind of reminded me, that scene close to the beginning where he's telling them, like, you know, this will do good for your town. As soon as he finishes his speech, the read I got on that was everyone is like not buying into it. Like they're all kind of start yelling, and he just kind of gets up and walks out of the room. And basically, like, he tells them all that, but he still gets to do it. But it's the read I got was that they don't really believe him when he's giving that speech. What did you think?
Well, like, okay, the speech I was just talking about is the one he gives to Little Boston, and I think they definitely believe him.
Okay.
The scene you're talking about is the I'm an oil man. I like to think of myself as one. Like, that speech is early on in the movie, and that town has kind of already been taken. That town's already dealing with all the craziness. Or at least that family. It's really hard to tell which. And, like, that's, you know, he leaves it because he doesn't want to have to deal with the argument. He doesn't want to have to deal with competition. He just wants the easiest thing outright. And so it's more plausible for him to go up north of where the well's been discovered, dig deeper, and take the oil before it flows to where the well had found it. And that's really, really funny. That he's more, and it's so emblematic of the whole system. It's like, oh, well, we'll just pass this legislation to make it harder for this kind of thing to be done. And it's just, no, instead of stopping doing it, the good capitalist just finds a workaround. And I think that's pretty on point. So it's like, oh yeah, well, if these communities don't want oil drilling and don't want to, quote unquote, be taken advantage of, they can just deny it. No, because then they find ways to outmaneuver them and take their resources from them anyway. Like, you know, nowadays it's lobbyists. It's all the same shit. But what's really funny is, to root it back to the character a little bit, is Daniel Plainview kind of still thinks of himself as the little guy, and he's not the Monopoly. I'll give him that. He's definitely, like I said earlier, he is definitely more from the trenches, as it were. That metaphor doesn't work since this movie takes place almost entirely pre-World War I, but anyway. He's definitely more from the trenches than your typical capitalist is. And so, like, he gets really annoyed with American Standard at a certain point because it's like, what are you going to do about shipping prices? And they're like, what? We don't own the railroads. Of course you do. They're like, he's like, he's smart enough to know the game. He's smart enough to understand that he's still gotta play to their hands to a degree. And that's, I don't know, it's just really interesting how that all works out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really great seeing how he plays the game, but also, like, how at times how he's not good at it, like, but he still is able to, air quotes, win by the end. It's really interesting.
And, like, it's just his ruthlessness that carries him through, and that's, again, very much a critique of capitalism. It's like, what was the study? Something like, oh, did you, like, you hear this kind of shit every year, and I guess I don't know how true it is. It's one of those internet studies things, but it does not surprise me if it is true. Like, oh, X number of sociopaths and psychopaths work in Wall Street and work as CEOs. I'm like, big fucking surprise. If you don't care about people and only care about how much you can make for yourself, yeah, you're probably going to be a really good capitalist. Like, why is that always portrayed as shocking information? Like, Yeah, if you just don't care about the effect you're going to have on people, if you're willing to just screw people over, you will make money. And again, this is not like a, I feel it's really easy to kind of cartoonishly portray leftists as like, oh, you just think that anyone who makes money is just an evil person. No, like there are ways you can become rich without being an awful person. The system's set up to benefit people to just become rich. Some people legitimately luck into it. I'll give ya. But there's still like an extreme advantage that if you just don't give a fuck about people and what effects you're going to have on them, yeah, you can make a lot of fucking money.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, if like you said, what was a sociopath? Like, if you have zero empathy at all, then like, yeah, you could make a killing. No pun intended, as Daniel Plainview kills. But yeah, and what do you think about the last line of the movie when he says, "Yeah, I'm finished"?
It's really hard to tell because does he know that he can't possibly get out of this one? Like, do you think that's maybe going on? Because it's 1927 by the end of the movie. We're right in the middle of the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Right? So like, oil, of course, was one of the few things that didn't take a hit in the Great Depression because, it's actually a commodity. Whereas, he's just murdered someone. The body's in his house. It's not like he can conveniently bury it in the woods. He's a somewhat well-known guy because apparently Eli mentions that he's doing, radio sermons now. Yeah, can he really, truly get out of that one? Is he saying he's finished because now he just kind of realizes, yeah, I can't buy my way out of this. I can't sneak my way out of this. I'm going to have to go to jail now. And I'm going to die there. Or is he saying he's finished because he's like, I'm done with this shit. I'm done with trying to fit in with this society that I'm not a part of anymore. I just want to be... I want success. I want to be successful in spite of others. But I'm not willing to... curtail to the lifestyle that my kind of success demands I have. I don't know. Maybe it's both.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking as you started to explain it, I was thinking both because not only is he finished because he very clearly cannot get out of this one, like his servant or butler doesn't seem like he would be the kind of guy who would go and call the police because he comes down and says hey, what's up? He doesn't seem surprised to see a dead body on the ground and a giant pool of blood. But like you said, Eli is well known enough that this is not something he'll easily be able to hide. So he will have to face his consequences. But I'm thinking also, he's killed Eli, who he's been doing this cat and mouse game with for 30 years, and so I feel like
20 years
or 20, yeah, and so maybe he's saying I'm finished, almost maybe this is putting too much importance on Eli, but kind of like how Alexander the Great, the legends say that he said that he cried when he realized there was nothing left to conquer, he's killed Eli, who's his big enemy throughout most of the movie, and now it's he doesn't have anyone left to match wits with. I wonder if maybe we could read that into that scene.
That's certainly possible, though he seems really raring to go up against his own son. I'm going to start my own company, Dad. This makes you my competitor now. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, he was really going to town, just trying to really amp up his son, trying to get his son riled up, and it didn't work. The son just walks away, and he's screaming after his son, you're not my kid, just really trying everything he can to...
A bastard in a basket. A bastard in a basket.
Yeah.
A bastard in a basket.
Yeah, and so like it's like you said, he's trying to create a new enemy in his son, and I don't think it works. Now, like I said, I do think that the son probably, if we were to see a sequel featuring HR, there's more to Daniel Playview in HR than what he lets on, but like I don't think that he's willing to play the game that Eli was willing to play.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting to talk about HW. Sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
It's interesting to talk about him because, yes, there's more of his father in him than he wants to let on, given that he wants to go into this business.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he's got someone that he actually seems to genuinely care about, and that cares about him.
Yeah.
And that creates a very different dynamic between the two of them then, right? The fact that he actually cares about someone. Like, and he hates his father, he wants to love his father and he just can't, because of how distant they are and because he's been so betrayed by him. He was straight abandoned.
Yeah.
And I'm not really talking about sending him off to school to learn sign language. I mean, straight abandoned in just like the moment of trauma, and that's really, really harsh.
You can see, like, we've talked about how great an actor Daniel Day-Lewis is. You can see, like, the kid, his demeanor changes, like, for the worse after that. Like, he does not forgive his dad for that. Like, that scene where Daniel Day-Lewis is, like, putting the napkin on his face, like, the son is not buying into that. Like, it's pretty rough.
I mean, the kid's so quiet and just, like, he's in such a depression after that, and he just hates his father, like, when he tries to light, Daniel and Henry on fire.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Like, and it's not like it is a cry for help in a number of ways, and of course Daniel just is not equipped to know how to deal with that. So he just chases his son out into the night and brings him back kicking and screaming, Mm-hmm. There's a lot of betrayal going on there. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Do you think, how much of, like, when he puts tries to set them on fire, how much of that do you think is the kid realizing that the brother is not really his brother, and how much of that is, like you said, him acting out?
I don't think he knows shit about the brother situation.
Okay.
I think that kid is just straight acting out because he has nothing, and his father's like getting more and more distant from him by the day.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I feel like Daniel's character is really, really connected to HW's character.
Mm-hmm.
He is the most human that he gets when he's around HW, when HW can still talk, or can still hear. After that, like, he starts to lose so much of, like, the only human connection, and it slowly starts to get built up with Henry until the betrayal happens, and then that falls apart too. So it's really, really, he becomes very complicated in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that scene of like him trying to kill them both is entirely just a cry for help. And, like, that anger kind of stays there, because when HW comes back, the first thing he does when his father and he are alone, quote unquote, is smack the shit out of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just damn.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, like, and, maybe we were too quick to speak when we were saying it, like, the closest thing to, like, a good guy is HW, because, like, he does have some to do in the movie. Like, initially I was thinking, like, yeah, he's just a kid and, like, he doesn't have much of a character, but he does have more of one than what I was, like, willing to let on at first.
Yeah, I think so. He's not as much a part of the movie as a lot of the other stuff, but he's decent in there.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen that child actor in anything else.
I haven't that I'm aware of. But it could be like one of those things like I didn't know I had seen Daniel Day-Lewis in The Crucible either.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think I'm about out of stuff with this one.
Okay. Yeah, I think I am too.
All right, let's go ahead and go on to ratings. I mean, I cannot lie. I think this is a very, very good film with really no problems. I don't have any real complaints about this movie. I remember I heard someone say the soundtrack is really, really bad, and I completely disagree with that. I really, really love this film, so I'm going to give this 5 out of 5 milkshakes.
Oh, dang it. I was hoping I could do that. Just real quick, the kid who plays HW has not been in anything else.
Oh, interesting.
I will give this, I'm gonna say 5 out of 5 oil drilling. What was it, Devitt?
Derek's.
But I will also add that it's not a movie I will go back to very often.
I think that's fair. All right, everyone. Next time on Geeky Gentlemen will be the first of 4 videos that Steve and I recorded while he was here in town. I guess there's no real point in holding the topic from you because you'll see it in the thumbnail by the time that's posted. So, Steve and I's first video was discussing the way in which online media has changed relationships and friendships in general. So there's that. Yeah, very apt thing for 2 internet friends meeting for the first time talking about. So it was kind of fun. Really good discussion. Hope to see you there for that next week. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the Cox Kid 2099.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.